Shroud might be a disappointment to some of you, and perhaps because people feel as though he didn't maximize his talent and adapt to playing the modern game as much. But someone in Cloud9 who did and has is Stewie2K. And Stewie2K offers guides and is one of their brand ambassadors over at Boomeo. So you can go and you can watch videos regarding how he thinks about the game, how he wants to play about the game. And Nothing, long-time veteran Cloud9 player who's veered between the two positions, also providing guides, all at Boomeo. Now, one thing that a style of criticism that really triggers me, it really irritates me and always has, not just for CSGO pros or even esports pros, but going beyond the game, is when people criticize pro players for not purely just practicing whatever their sport or field or game is all the time. And so in the case of CSGO pros, it's people saying, why don't they play CSGO more? If they see them streaming, they say, why are you streaming other games? Why not CSGO? Wouldn't you improve? It's a scenario where they do interviews or they do other activities or they do brand building activities or they work with their team on marketing. Yeah, well, you know what? Maybe if you were doing more practice and maybe if you were studying demos, you wouldn't be losing right now. Instead, you're out here making vlogs and videos and shows for the fans. So at the moment, the instance that's really brought this up to me is the case where people are really critiquing Shroud over the fact that he'll stream like pub battlegrounds or whatever the fuck this game's. I don't play any games other than esports games, by the way. The idea that, like, you know, he's doing that instead of practicing and that's why he's not some top player or whatever. Now, anyone who knows me and what I think of Shroud, I don't think Shroud's a good player. I think Shroud is a below average pro player. I think that he has wasted his talent, but it's not that I think he doesn't care about being a pro. It's not that I've never subscribed to the idea that he just streams too much and that's what he cares about. He's consciously decided to put his streaming ahead of his pro play and therefore he doesn't work to get better as a pro player. If I had to speculate, to guess, I mean, this would obviously be a good topic for a video sometime, as to why Shroud hasn't delivered on his potential, I would guess some things like mindset within that, his sporting psychology. There's then the aspect of whether he himself understands how to be used in the game, whether he's willing to be used in the game in the way that I think he should be and some of his past teammates think he should be. These are the aspects I'd go to. It's not lack of man hours. It's not lack of playing 10-mans or rank S or whatever else. It's not playing too much Battlegrounds or I don't know what else, fucking RuneScape, whatever he plays, I don't know. Those don't even come into my mind. They don't even factor in the equation as far as I'm concerned. Now, in the case of people criticizing these pros, I'm obviously not talking about scenarios where a player is legitimately out of form or kind of match fitness, as it were, purely because of lack of play. They don't put in the hours. So we're not talking about someone who has really rusty skills, who doesn't improve as a player at all because he doesn't put any effort to adapt, who's lazy at learning a new role and just doesn't work in general. This isn't willing to and has actively taken the choice not to, because that's not what we're talking about with Shroud. That is not the instance that is his particular case. So when you talk about professionalism for pro esports players, I think a lot of the resentment for this really does stem down to very simple psychology that fans out there wish they were pro players, see all the upsides of being pro player, wish that their players in their team succeeded, and so they find a way to make it that if the player isn't succeeding, they reverse engineer it, that he hasn't played enough, that he's not focused enough, that he's not driven enough to be a better player. They imagine, if I was on that team and I was a pro player, I'd be practicing 12 hours a day. They have no clue what it'd actually be like in that scenario. That is a pipe dream in their mind. It's like a fat person telling me, you know what, if I was paid to be a fitness model, I'd bloody work out 14 hours a day in the gym. Really? How do you know? Have we got any basis to suggest that you have any clue what that lifestyle is like? No, we don't. And it's very easy to say things rather than actually have to do them, right? And also, you don't know what it takes to do a lifestyle. You have no clue whether it's just man hours in the gym. You don't know any of these aspects whatsoever. So when it comes to the idea of what is professionalism, what is professional behavior for a professional player, right? Professionalism in general, for me, nearly always comes down to this simple statement. It is doing what is expected of your job. It's turning up at the right time. It's putting in the right effort. It's providing a certain level of quality. Now, you can argue Shroud isn't providing that level of quality. Now, I could get in a whole debate, another video entirely, that actually he's one of the most valuable players for Cloud9. What he provides with his streaming presence and his brand exposure is incredibly more so than you get from a Stu2K or an Automatic, and actually can literally earn Cloud9 more dollars per player than those players do. And in that sense, is more valuable. But let's ignore that part and look at the fact that he does turn up on time. He does do the scrims. He does maintain his level. He goes to all these tournaments. He's willing to play other roles and actually let other people be the star. Seems like a very easygoing guy in that respect. Doesn't cause problems in the team. This guy is actually a pretty good professional. He's someone who's living up to the billing of what a professional should be. And I know many NA players who don't fit all those bills who are better than him, who actually I might take to be in a team, but I'd know this guy's kind of unprofessional in some ways. I'm going to have to deal with his attitude and him not working hard enough and turn up to practice and actually slacking off and not learning the new smokes or watching the demos asked him to do. I don't have to worry about that with Shroud. Shroud's problems are an entirely different realm of the game and lifestyle and skill set than not putting in the raw hours. In fact, the fact that this guy does practice, do all the professional things, and then sometimes stream CS on top of it, I think he absolutely plays enough Counter-Strike as far as I'm concerned. My issues with him are entirely separate to that. So when we talk about professionalism as a pro player, right, turning up to scrims, that's not even negotiable. You must do that. And when I hear about high-level pros who don't do that or who turn up late, that's one of the things I do criticize them for. Or they get a reputation where I don't necessarily reveal that private information, but you start hearing me talk about the fact they're not dedicated enough or they're not driven and they maybe don't want it as much as the other people because they're hurting their teammates at that point in time as well as themselves. Then I'm talking about pros as well as professionals who maintain their level. Now, that is entirely skill dependent. That is one of the key cruxes of this argument here, is that depending on what your skill set is, how much you've gotten out of that, what role you play, and who you are as a person, that skill level is going to be different. So, for example, people like Shox and Forrest have had periods in their career where they didn't really care as much, and where they were a little bit out of it, and they were dealing with some personal drama. And so they played less, but they're still much better players in that point in time than Shroud is now. What, are we supposed to congratulate them for playing less and being less professional than him, but being better players? So just because they have some genetic or experience or bizarre it factor talent that he doesn't have, they somehow are allowed to get away with all these things that are unprofessional, but he's not. How's that fair in any sense? So it's all skill dependent. It all depends who you are. Some players, Get Right still works like an absolute demon, and this guy's not having good results at all. You have to congratulate him for his efforts, though, don't you? Just because someone else plays better doesn't mean that they're a more professional, dedicated player, does it? Now, once you've done scrims and once you've maintained your level, everything else is optional. Literally optional. So working more than that to try and get even better and be one of the greatest players of all time, or elevate yourself 2-3 times better if you find your right niche, that's up to you. That's up to you if you want to accomplish that in your career, and that's how driven you are and how much CSGO means to you. And before anyone again, those plebs come in, CSGO should mean everything to you. Shut the fuck up. Why should it? Give us some reasons why. And don't make them all, well, if I was it, and I think that. No, give us some actual reasons, some quantifiable reasons, some really strong arguments as to why CSGO should be the only thing that matters to them. But they get paid to. Yes, many people get paid to. As I've just described there, some people get paid to play who don't even have to put in 100% effort all the time, but they're so good that they're better than some people who do put in 100% effort. So again, give us some actual reasons as to why you should have to dedicate your whole life to the game. You dedicate the professional part of your life. You dedicate 8-9 hours, 6-7 hours, depending on what team you are. You dedicate weeks of your life to travel and go to events and all this. They don't get everything beyond that. There's something called personal liberty that everyone gets, no matter if they're a player who plays American football and gets $10 million, or they're a guy who's at the post office and gets $5 an hour. Everyone gets that free time, gets that personal liberty to live their life the way they want it, because we're not in fucking Soviet Union Russia, mate. Well, Soviet Union, I guess, kind of redundant term there, right? So yes, you have superstars who we hear the great stories about how dedicated they are. They're in the gym all day shooting shots. Oh, they're playing 9-10 hours. They're playing deathmatch on top of it, 10 months. They're trying to get better. Yeah, we admire that. But we admire it because it goes above and beyond what normal people can do. And remember, pro players are normal people who are better than the average person at games, who are better than most people at games, but they're still normal people. A lot of them aren't exceptional people with amazing drive and this like force within them, this vital energy that bursts out. Those exceptional people, the ones that border on genius or just have something special about them, something vital, those are rare in every area of life, and especially in esports, as well as other areas of writing, poetry. You get people. Okay, one of the great writers in sci-fi is called Douglas Adams, right? He was famously incredibly lazy and a massive procrastinator. His books are still better than a lot of people who are very dedicated, though. This is the point. different people, they have different ways of expressing themselves as a person and then in their work as well. So he was actually unprofessional in many senses. So yes, you get those Kobe Bryants and those Peyton Mannings who go above and beyond. Their whole life is the game. But I actually can understand why they might do it at their level. They are gods and they can therefore accomplish the greatest accomplishments of all time and go for the number one spot of all time because they're so in love with the game and trying to chase greatness. But you know what? Yes, you get the occasional person who's a jobber, who's just bottom of the roster, and he still works incredibly hard and puts in the effort. He's a veteran. Yeah, that's great as well. We admire that too in its own way because we know that guy isn't as skilled, but he's getting a lot done. But between the two, it's basically like 89 to 90% of people. There's many basketball players who go to practice and they work on their game and they play in the game as hard as they can. And then they go home, they have their family, they have their wife, they have little businesses they're running, they have their interests, and they're a pro and they play professionally, and then they have their life. And you can't ever demand that they give up their life to be a pro because other pros aren't doing it. And also, it's just not an obligation. The fan and society can't demand that you give up everything for that money. That is a ridiculous request to make. And no one should have to live under those circumstances. Then you've got to consider that, yeah, there are the odd cases in CSGO of players who work themselves to death because they want to get better, who aren't good players. So like you hear about Freiberg and God B when he was in America, going absolutely hard with practice and it not having that much impact in the server. Yeah, on the one hand, I admire their effort to try and get better and all the rest of it. I don't demand it of them though. And this is a key point to make. If you think Shroud right now is not good enough in Cloud9, then it is simple. Either Cloud9 are making a mistake keeping him or they should simply kick him. That is it. It's nothing to do with him not playing enough hours or him streaming another game. That is not the fact that even that might add up to 0.1%. And before somebody says, 0.1% is everything. No, not in this particular scenario of one player. Now, every player ever, a tiny little fraction could be a lot. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about one player, 0.1% of his potential being affected by this. So it's totally irrelevant. It would not affect any games, would not win you any more tournaments, would not get you any further in events playing those 1 or 2 hours extra. So in the concept of free time, this is something I'm very passionate about because I've seen in esports what happens to people when you push them to that breaking point and you demand that they're all these exceptional people. And here's the secret to the exceptional people. You wouldn't have to push them. Froggen, Faker, Kobe Bryant, Peyton Manning, these people actually love what they do so much that they are not only great, but they want to get greater and give up all their time. Essentially, they use their free time, it feels like free time to them, to work on the game and to work in the game more. They are exceptional people. They are very rare. You can't get a guy who does his professional aspect, does a good job, and then tell him, now you must give up everything else as well, and force him to do so. Even if he did it, he wouldn't be able to enjoy it very much. It would probably psychologically push him to breaking point, if not break him, and it would just ruin his quality of life. And so I've seen, particularly in the Korean model, how that has ruined people's lives. It's degraded them as people and stopped them from enjoying a balanced life and being able to let off some mental steam. So I want pro players in CSGO to have lives, not just be slaves to a pro job. The Korean model and League of Legends in general is a fucking nightmare. You live in a team house, you're surrounded by your teammates and people who essentially critique your job as part of their job as your bosses. You have massive practice schedules every week pretty much. You have non-stop critique of how you played this week, how you played in the scrim, how they expect you to play, how the opponent's going to play, and therefore what are you doing to prepare for it? You play every week practically within the season and are judged life or death on that until you get to the playoffs. The pressure to perform is insane. If you aren't performing, they want you cut immediately. In the Korean scene, we'll bring in someone else who's a talent. And you know what? Oh, you won't play the 15 hours? We'll bring in someone who does play the 15 hours. They really will do that. You are expected in the Korean scene to go above and beyond what a professional's about and even what could actually maximize 95% of your game as a person. I think CSGO has the ideal balance for pros. So they get to live at home with their friends and family. They have more comfort. They have a support network around them these players don't have in team houses in League of Legends. And therefore, they can have the normal environment of their life where they feel relaxed, where they can get away from the game when they're not practicing. And yet, they can still be pros at the highest level and win world championships. They can travel to events from time to time, see other places, have time off, and more importantly, have less important games between that aren't life and death. And therefore, every match isn't life and death and isn't so much pressure and isn't breaking you when you make a little mistake, but one that actually you had to make in that scenario because you're just not the perfect player. It's not the same pressure. You don't even have to leave your country permanently. You can stay in whatever country you come from. Nico can go back to fucking Bosnia. It doesn't matter that he plays in FaZe or that he plays in Mousesports. He doesn't have to move to Germany or fucking America or whatever if the FaZe had a team house. He doesn't have to do any of that. He can go all the way back to Bosnia, back to his home environment and live out his life there. The free time of pro players in CSGO is their time entirely. It gives them time to cool off. So as an individual, it means that they can let off steam and they can live their own life without other people surrounding them. It means that teams get time to cool off, so you don't get the same arguments of two people who argue in the game and don't work well together, and then in real life they're arguing over who took whose Pepsi out the fridge and who didn't order them the right pizza, and therefore you get the blow-ups and the arguments that continue outside of the game. Whereas if you all just log off a Ventrilo server, all of it, no one uses fucking Ventrilo anymore, do they? Or you all just log off Skype or Discord or whatever, and then the argument doesn't happen because they're not there to argue about things. So think about it. In their free time, some pros watch movies or TV shows. Some pros play other games. Some pros practice CS more. The problem here is that of the three groups, the only one you know what they do in their practice time are the ones who play other games and are streamers and decide to stream the other games. And so you look at those guys and you abuse them, or you tell them you don't try hard enough, or why aren't you doing something else? And you decide that you can put yourself in their shoes, know what their job's like, even though you don't know half these factors, and then berate them for what they should do. But you don't berate the guy who's watching the movies because you don't know he's watching movies. You don't berate the guy who's actually pracking CS but just playing with friends and not on stream. You have no clue what that guy's doing now and might be dicking around just playing in a really stupid manner that's actually not helping his skill set. But it doesn't matter because it's free time. He can do what he wants in his free time. So if I told you this group of players, Kenny S, Happy, Forrest, you might think some of the greatest players of all time, players who've been among the best players in the world. No, those are all players who I know as a fact and have many sources to corroborate, have had periods in their career where they were good players still, where they were on top teams still, where they were getting paid good salaries still, and they didn't practice much. They didn't put in much extra effort. They did their basics that their job required of them. They did nothing beyond that. At times. Not all the time. Sometimes they were very dedicated, but at times. No one has a problem with them, right? No, because since they aren't failing your expectations somehow, you don't know what they're doing, you don't see them dicking around not on CSGO, you're fine with that. Now if I give you this group, Dennis from Mouse Sports, Shroud, Daps from NRG. Now, I'm just giving you examples there. Aside from Shroud, I've never even heard stories of the others not practicing enough and that being... But they're all players who people think underperform, or sometimes we call shit compared to other pros, and we don't think they're good, and people call them to be cut. But just because they're bad players, that suddenly means they're not trying hard enough, or that we should demand they give their whole lives up and have no free time. It's a ridiculous scenario. So you know what? If you're Shroud, go do you, mate. You do your we'll you do your job. If we'll criticize you on your play in the actual matches, do whatever you want on your stream. Stream anything you want, build your brand up any way you want, deal with your fans any way you want. None of your issues are to do with that. And as far as people watching Shroud go, just stop and think a second. That what demands you're making of someone, and the fact that you're being unreasonable yourself. And if Shroud isn't good enough for Cloud9, then he isn't good enough for Cloud9. It's not about whether he's playing PUBG Battlegrounds. I don't know what the fuck these games are called.